Welcome to another episode of DevShop Stories. My name is Josh, and I have Kai here with me and Ryan as well for the first time. And today we're going to share a story about layoffs. So layoffs right now are in the news, and unfortunately they do happen to large companies, medium-sized companies, small companies, and it's something that really stinks. It's terrible to kind of deal with, both usually on the employer side, and I say usually because we're going to talk about some of this stuff, and on the employee side. So Red Sky Engineering has honestly never been able to escape layoffs, unfortunately. And so we've had to do, kind of our share. So Alex and Spencer, if you're listening, you probably should have stayed working late the other day. But no, I jest. But yeah, we've had to kind of do our share sometimes too. And, when those times did, we just kind of looked at our cash and whether we're going to be able to keep maintaining payroll at the rate based on how much work we had, and we individually called in each employee, including the ones that were actually not even let go, and we just kind of explained like, hey, things are tight and we're going to have to make cuts, and you're safe, and but some people we had to say, we just going to have to let you go. And unfortunately it really sucks. I believe though that we did it in a right way. We kind of addressed the entire staff, we addressed the individuals, we tried everything we could to help them place into new positions. We wrote LinkedIn recommendations from, their employer and saying this person's great. We've tried to reach out to other people that we knew. And it's just, unfortunately, it's something that happens. And so the rest of this podcast, we're going to kind of talk about what's going on in the world. And we've kind of been scraping the internet and kind of pulling up statistics and kind of looking at different things. And Kai, kind of what's your thoughts on what's going on?
I mean, the big thing here we're going to talk a lot about is big tech and some of the layoffs that you see in the headlines. But I mean, small businesses, I want to say it almost hurts more because these are people that you work with every day that you see. And when you have to talk about layoffs, these are actual names and people that rather than just another number or a gear in the cog per se,
Right. Yeah, let's talk about kind of the wrong way to do it, which is unfortunately kind of what's happening with some of these companies, right? Did you guys hear about the story of the guy that laid off 900 people over Skype?
I've seen stories, but I haven't heard that specific one.
Yeah, I think it was better.com. They basically, nobody knew it was coming. It was, I think, right before Christmas Day, and he had on 900 people onto a Skype and basically said, hey, if you're on this Skype call now, unfortunately, you're laid off. And so, that was it. That was the cut. And right before a major holiday, which is obviously one of the worst times, I know another example of a friend of mine that actually worked at this company, and they did the same thing where it was Christmas Eve. They basically called a number of people in and just told them like, hey, you're not making the cut here. And it wasn't necessarily because of financial reasons. What they had done before is they actually had an expert in the field come out and re-interview people for their jobs and basically say like, are you good enough? Quiz them on their programming and all that stuff. And so he basically gave his recommendations of like who to keep and who to that. And so they decided to do those cuts on Christmas Eve, which is terrible.
The sad thing about that too is think of the morale of that company. Something that's important and something we're addressing right now is culture, right, at Red Sky. And so you think of the culture of those companies and kind of the hit that they take, because that's a huge punch to the gut, not just for the people that lost their jobs, but the people that had to sit by and watch their friends get fired Christmas Eve. That can't be good for long-term morale.
Right. And it makes people question, where am I? Am I next?
Right.
When is the next one coming for me?
I was just going to say the suddenness, 1 week they're there, the next week they're gone. It really does put everyone on the edge, and it's hard to get rid of that.
It comes back to you feel like a number, you're not even part of the layoff, and yet you feel like a number. It's like, okay, are they gonna wait for, my kid's first birthday to let me go? Or are they gonna wait for any other holidays to let us go? Kind of taints it.
And it's becoming so commonplace right now over the last few months with big tech layoffs, and the economy's bad and all that kind of stuff. And so much so that there's been a website that has popped up just recently, and it is layoffs.fyi is a really interesting site that just kind of keeps track of these numbers that are coming out. So we're going to kind of read some of these big ones. So obviously, just recently on January 20th, 2023, Google announced 12,000 people. So 6% of their entire workforce is being laid off. A few months before that was Meta or Facebook with 11,000 people, basically 13% of their workforce. We have other examples of Amazon with 10,000.
Just a quick note on that too is I didn't realize how large Amazon was compared to these other companies.
Oh, yeah.
It's the same number of people essentially, but
3%
you're talking about 3% of their workforce.
I think they're over 1 million employees right now, Amazon, if you think of all their distribution centers and everything like that. Yeah. So yeah, Amazon, 10,000 people, Microsoft, 10,000 people, Salesforce, big software SaaS service that does, sales is at 8,000 people just announced on January 4th. So 10% of their workforce. And the list just kind of goes on, and it's...
What's great about this website too is they've got the source on it. So you can go and read a little bit more about it instead of taking it face value.
Right. And so the other numbers that are on this website are obviously the laid off, the date, the percentages, what industry they're in, but they also have the stage of the company. So whether they're a public company or a private company, kind of a medium or large.
Now this is interesting. Google Docs, a list of employees. Oh, check that out.
Oh, wow. So, it actually has the employees that were laid off or
their LinkedIn profiles, their target role, where they're at, like junior, mid,
which
senior.
I think is awesome. If you're looking for, new talent to hire or something, you could basically reach out to them on LinkedIn.
They've got resumes in here.
Yeah. So
that's fascinating.
So it seems like the site is kind of really set up to obviously inform, but also to help those who unfortunately got laid off into other positions.
That's an awesome resource for any business trying to hire, look for talent.
Mm-hmm. Now, Kai, you found an article that was kind of interesting that had a couple different points in there. You want to kind of go through that?
Yeah, it was an article put out by NPR. They were just talking about the tech layoffs. This isn't the first time that tech has had a slump, but it's definitely one of the biggest. I think they mentioned as far as for number of people being laid off, this is probably one of the biggest since the 2000.com crash. And so they kind of listed out a couple points that I think we should go through. I think we good info. But ultimately right now, I guess the big thing was big tech is not in trouble per se. Like right now, I think there's a lot of fears with high inflation and what could come next. And so companies are more defensive than just going bankrupt. To kind of prove some of these points, they pointed out that all these big tech companies are having record profit years, or Microsoft trying to acquire Blizzard for $69 billion in cash. I think the model has proven that there is still lots of cash reserves. These companies are in good spots. It's just that these are more defensive plays right now than anything.
Right. And there's a couple more points, but one thing I wanted to point out was this other graph that we actually have. Unfortunately, it's a podcast, can't really share with you, but we'll put it up in an article. And what it shows is it shows the actual employee counts of Facebook, Google, Microsoft, and Apple from 2018 to 2023. And what you see in this graph is that each one of those companies are growing, but some are growing significantly faster than others. For example, Facebook is just massively taken off on they call it like a hockey stick, an exponential growth. Microsoft and Google are still growing extremely fast. Apple is growing, but it's not, the actual slope of the line is quite a bit lower. And what you see here is that on the layoffs that have happened in 2023, the number of employees dropped, and it sounds like huge numbers. It sounds like, 10,000 people or whatever. But if you actually look at the graph, all it really sets them back to is about the size that they were right around COVID 2021, when they really started going on some massive hiring sprees. Apple, on the other hand, that has kind of taken the slow and steady approach to hiring, hasn't announced any layoffs yet. And maybe they are coming and whatnot, but they haven't gone gangbusters with employee growth. And so kind of interesting.
That is, I think it just speaks to the industry. There's a lot of opportunity still. We're still super excited to be here in this industry as a development shop. And we do feel like it's going to grow in the next couple of years. I think right now what we're seeing is just a correction in over hiring and maybe some of the aggressive growth.
We're still feeling some of the uncertainty, right? But there's still, as far as pipeline growth, feel there's a lot of opportunity, right?
And historically, I know McKay, who's been on these podcasts before, he's actually done some research into what has happened during recessions, what kind of industries really boom, which ones really falter. The funniest ones that really go well through a recession are like discount stores. So like Dollar Tree and all those other ones, they actually excel quite a bit because other people are looking for it. The other thing that happens too is when people get laid off, they start thinking, okay, what else can I do to make some money maybe on the side? Maybe I should just start an Etsy shop, or I should do, a Shopify website and start selling little things I can create or whatever.
So you're saying our little niche of e-coms is going to do all right here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe we need to create one for Dollar Tree or
yeah, exactly.
the next Amazon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, people look for that. And the other thing that he has studied is that large companies will obviously have layoffs, but they still have work they have to get done. And so they sometimes turn to kind of outsourcing their software needs. And so that's kind of where Red Sky Engineering could fit in for sure.
It is shocking to me how, you lose 16% of your, or was it 13 that Amazon lost, and yet I'm still getting my packages on day 2, through my Primes. It's amazing how they can drop that many employees and still keep moving.
Well, it's the Twitter effect, right? With Elon Musk doing his Thanos snap, and 50% of the people are just gone the next day.
That was 3,700 employees, according to this website.
Yeah. And it just goes to show that there is definitely bloat at these companies because Twitter still works as far as I know. I'm not an avid Twitter user.
I wonder, a lot of these places, they have just killer perks, right? What were you looking at the other day where it was
Google.
It was Google.
Yeah. And she was in the hiring department. And so actually, a lot of these layoffs are kind of in those industries where they're recruiters and that kind of stuff. The tech ones, yes, there has been some downsizing there, but not nearly as much as kind of some of the staff that they don't need if they're kind of putting a pause on hiring.
Kai, you had said something about the statistics of who's getting jobs and who isn't and how quickly.
There was a study done in an article, that same NPR article by ZipRecruiter. They were showing that 8 out of 10 techies that were laid off were able to find a new job in 3 months. 4 out of 10 of those were actually to be able to find a job that next month. So there is still jobs going up and opportunities, albeit it's a lot more competitive because the market's a lot more full.
Right. And going back to that kind of the right way, wrong way of layoffs and stuff, I don't know, like talk to me about how should Google have handled it? Obviously, a number of people were just let go either text or email, or they got to the door and they just couldn't open it and stuff. What's your thoughts on that? That challenge you have is you're going to lay off people. Some people are going to become disgruntled and they might want to take down the whole system with them when they go. We talked about DevShop horror stories where, somebody was basically leaving and he wrote code that obfuscated all of the software and made bugs everywhere and stuff, right? So what's your guys' thoughts?
I think the thing that people hate the most is the surprise. I've seen plenty of videos of employees or former employees talking about their experience where they saw the news article that morning, they asked their boss, and their boss told them, no, you're fine. And then later on, the boss reaches out and says, hey, I actually was let go. You're let go too. We're all out of jobs. And so I think communication is a key point. With tech, it's a little hard because sometimes it's hard to keep people on because they could sabotage the code. They could do a lot of things, and which is why you see a lot of these companies give actually pretty decent severance packages to find places.
Mm-hmm.
They just don't have access to anything because they don't want to run the risk.
So I think that's a big part of it, Kai, is that people want to feel like they're treated like humans, even if it is, layoffs come at all times of the year, right? Like you can't really decide that. And so even if it's near Christmas, you want to feel like, the person that you just spent the last year or 2 or 5 with, that they care about you. But at the end of the day, these big companies, you got to remember that what's their number one goal?
Bring profit.
Taking care of the shareholder, right? And so at the end of the day, most companies, they can have their mission statement that they're there to change the world. Right. But at the end of the day, you got to make that shareholder happy. And when you're seeing inflation go up, when there's these fears of a crashing economy, and they're making these they just got to make these defensive moves.
What do you think about how it would have been received if those Google's employees, instead of doing all the massive cuts, they just said, hey, we're going to cut out all these perks, anything that's going to cost us money, like we're going to no more free lunches, no more massages, no more whatever,
100%. So I think of I've been at Red Sky for 2 weeks. Before this, I was at another small company. It was still about 10 times the size of what we're at, but still a small business. And every time we had a great profit sharing program, loved it. The owner was very generous, gave 25% of profits back to the employees. Okay. Anytime we had a party or we had a raffle, all I could think about was, Now, would I rather have like a 10th or 100th of that? Just keep those profits. Even
Right.
would think that, so these people are like, wow, these other people kept their jobs,
Right.
but they also kept their perks. They still got a full-time gym. They still got free food. They still got, going to Disney. I had a buddy that they sent, the entire family to Disneyland for 5 days, and they paid for the babysitter to go with. Like,
Wow.
these things are still happening.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But it makes you wonder if the pitchforks would have come out if they said, well, we're not doing layoffs, but we're cutting back on all these little perks that you get and stuff, I don't know.
That's a good question.
I would like to think that people would get it. I would appreciate it, because no one knows what side of the road they're on that one. Am I part of it?
I know we've talked plenty of times here at Red Sky where we know lots of people here would be willing to take a pay cut to help prevent layoffs or help prevent someone from losing their job if they had to. Not to say we want to, or don't worry if anyone's listening to this. That's not the plan.
Unless it's Alex, right?
I'm just saying the quality of people, it kind of does vary. And
there's a lot more flexibility in a small business, that's for sure. Like before we came over here, I talked to my wife and I said, it's time for us to start saving up a little nest egg just in case. Because in the early days of this last small business, when things got tight, the first thing that people thought was layoffs, but really that was the last thing we were looking for. Because you go lay off a developer here, and what happens in 3 months when you get a new project? Now you've got to put that overhead, that 120 hours or however many hours it is that we put into a developer to get them brought up to speed. That's the last thing we want to do. So layoffs is like a last resort, right?
Another thought I was thinking about was while it's not fun for anyone, especially for the person getting laid off, it is an opportunity for those people who do get laid off. I mean, now is the time to improve your skills. Now is the time to get to that next level. You have a pretty decent reason of why you left your last job. Now you can go at full force into your next career choice or whatever you do, and maybe get an even better pay raise or a better job that fits your schedule.
Yeah. So going back to that humanity thing, I was thinking about my mom. So you got to think of the other side of the layoff too. My mom was over the Western division of a very large home mortgage company. In 2008, we had horrible crashes that all surrounded mortgages. So I believe this mortgage company narrowed down from 13 offices on the Western side of the United States. They narrowed it down to 1. So my mom was hired, or she was at a small mortgage company that was acquired by this larger one. Anyway, she was the one that was in charge of laying everyone off. She laid off over 3,000 people, and it actually destroyed her. So you got to think of the people that are laying you off don't want to do it either.
Right.
I hate to bring that up, and the pitchforks are probably going to come out for that one, but they're just as human as you are. And I mean, it left a toll on her for 6, 7, 8 years. So
I remember the same story when I was talking to another previous company who's another coworker with me, and he was in charge of a small tech group. And what they did, large company, it was like HP, Agilent kind of company, and they had just a policy that says every year we're going to cut 10% of the staff. Just the bottom of the rung, we're just going to cut. And say that you're not performing. That way they thought we can keep it fresh, we can make sure everybody's on their toes and working hard and everything. And in his division, he had, let's say, 10 people. And they were all amazing performers, but he was mandated to still have to get rid of one of those people. And it was just like, it tore him apart. And he said when he, pulled the person in and told him, he just, after that, he ran out because they had a big courtyard and just started crying. Yeah.
I mean, when you let someone go, usually the best thing is to have an objective approach to it, right? Like, you guys have done a pretty good job at that through the gamification. And you guys talked about that in an episode previously, I think. But how do you let him go? Like, yeah. What do you say? What do you say?
I'm forced to do this. This is not my choice, kind of thing.
That's miserable.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot easier if it's a performance issue or,
Yeah, you were supposed to do 10 things. You did, 6, and you did 6 things when you're supposed to be doing 10 things for 8 weeks.
Right.
Boom. You're gone.
It's a lot harder though when you look them in the eye and say, hey, you've done everything we've asked.
I legitimately don't want to do this. You're doing a great job. I'll give you a recommendation, like you were saying earlier, like we'll put something on LinkedIn. We'll put feelers out, but it's miserable.
I might have some friends. I'm going to call them right after this, that kind of thing. That's That's the way you'd hope you'd want to go.
I could probably make it through one of those layoffs before I myself just said, nah, it's time for me to go too.
You know?
I was just going to say, it makes me think of a story of one of my buddies who worked at a company, and they were going through, it was an oil business, and the oil business kind of ebbs and flows with the cost of a barrel of oil. And they were going through a pretty deep trench, I guess. And so they decided that they were going to lay off like 25% of the workforce. And they selected 25% of the workforce based on how many Git pushes they were doing a day, or it was like how many lines of code were changed a day.
Wow.
And he was the chief engineer on the project. So he wasn't committing as many lines of code because he's out, coaching people and,
Right.
setting the vision for the product. And so he happened to be one of the people that was let go.
Wow.
Wow. I think the takeaway I just want to throw out there to anyone that's building tech, I mean, it's a great time to look for people to hire, but also if you're looking to avoid layoffs, say like if you just have like a MVP product you're trying to build or a new feature you're trying to implement. I mean, the reason why we DevShops are doing really well right now is because people don't want to take the risk. They don't want to hire someone only to let them go a few months down the road. I think from what we found, it is so much cheaper and it's going to be a lot less taxing on the individuals to hire an outside firm if you're just looking to get started or if you're just looking to add a small thing to it where you don't need a full-time staff. And I think the industry, it's pretty traditional or pretty common to just, we're going to do everything in-house. We're going to hire and then we're just going to fire. And maybe this is a new approach and a new wave that we can start to implement as we go forward.
Yeah, it's a whole lot cheaper. You're not worrying about the benefits, the hiring process, the bring up,
The training.
the training, the tools. You're not worrying about any of that. You're getting what you want at a lower price point, right? You're getting that temporary resource.
And
So
no
it's a good point.
emotional cost of having to hire just to fire.
Mm-hmm. No, it's a good point.
Well, thanks for coming on, Ryan and Kai, and thank you for listening to our story. We'll be back next week with more stories, personal experiences, and advice on running a dev shop. Thanks.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, guys.